Hey, this is Sean with Tab Performance, and today I'm going to show you how to install the Zippers Performance Redshift 468 cam kit on the Milwaukee 8 engine. Okay, so we are going to be installing the Redshift 468 cam by Zippers Performance, and in that kit you get all the gaskets you're going to need. You also have some S&S parts, which are the quickie push rods, the hydraulic lifters here, the new cam bearing, and some new O-rings for all the O-rings that you're going to be taking out. And then it also comes with these collapsible push rod tubes here. And then last but not least, we obviously have the cam here. This is the 468 cam. So the first step to do this job is to remove the bags, and to do that you simply open up the bags and loosen the two knobs here. Just back them out like you would any bolt. Also, you want to be sure if you have any wires running to either a speaker or a light, you want to make sure to disconnect that. And they lift right off. The next step is to remove the mufflers. First thing you need to do is loosen up the clamps. On this right hand side it's a 15 millimeter. The left hand side is a 9/16. So go ahead and loosen up the clamps here. Once you have the clamp loosened, there are two bag brackets here and it's a 1/2 inch socket, so go ahead and take those out. And it always helps us to go ahead and add a little bit of WD-40 where the muffler slips over the header. They should just slip right off of there. Once we get the mufflers off, we can go ahead and move up front, and we need to take this floorboard off to get to the header here. So you don't need to take it all the way off. You can just remove the back bolt and loosen the front one, and then just let it hang here, and that'll give us enough room to get the heat shields off there. And that is a 5/16 Allen. Now we can go ahead and start removing the heat shields here, and we need to work from back to front. So we'll take this piece off here, and then we'll go ahead and take these two pieces off here. And it's just two hose clamps kind of hiding underneath here. And you can either use a flathead screwdriver or a 5/16 socket. And go ahead and back those all the way out. And one thing you'll probably notice here, that this is not actually the stock header. This is our aftermarket header here that we made. We have it on here because we were doing some dyno runs, so we just left it on because the process is going to be the exact same as take the stock one off, so you can still follow the steps that I'm doing. Now that the heat shields are off, we can go ahead and start loosening the bolts that hold the head pipe onto the bike. There's another clamp here that connects the head pipe to the cross under piece, so we can go ahead and loosen that clamp up, and it's a 9/16. Once you get the cross under clamp loosened, you can go ahead and remove the bracket bolt that supports this cross under piece into position. Go ahead and back it all the way out. And then we have a 1/2 inch nut here, and then there's two nuts per cylinder here, so we have two in the back and two in the front that we need to remove as well. get that bracket off, you can go ahead and slide your retainers down off the studs that hold them in there. Make sure you have all the bolts off, and then you can just go ahead and maneuver this to get it out. And then before you can take this thing off, there's actually two O2 sensor bolts that you need to go ahead and loosen, or actually take all the way out. So 9/16 wrench here. Just get those out. Go ahead and just back this thing out slowly and be careful. You still have that heat shield connected to the cross under, so you want to make sure you don't bang it on anything when you pull it out. Once you get the mufflers and the head pipe all off, the next step is to go ahead and remove your air cleaner. We have our Zombie Breath intake on here, so I'll show you the process for this, but just know that if you have a stock one or any other brand of aftermarket air cleaner, it may be different than what this one is. But for ours, we have these faceplate screws, and it's a 1/8 Allen, so just go ahead and back all of those out. Once you get the faceplate off, there are 3 more bolts holding on the housing here, so it'll be a 5/32 Allen, so go ahead and back those 3 out. So this whole thing comes right off, and go ahead and remove the breather bolt hose there. And we also have an LED light underneath here, so if you have anything like that, make sure you disconnect whatever's underneath there. Now that the air cleaner is out of the way, we need to go ahead and remove our push rod covers. To do that, we pull down on the collar here, and then pry out with a screwdriver or something similar. Once we got the push rod collars up and out of the way, and we have the tubes or the covers up and out of the way, the next step is we're going to go ahead and cut our stock push rods out. And this is the fastest way to do it. You can also go in through the top, but to do that you have to remove the tank, remove the heads. So we're going to use the S&S quickie push rods, which allows us to do it this way. So what we need to do before we cut them out is to make sure that there's absolutely no spring pressure, or as little as spring pressure, on whatever cylinder you're working on. We're going to go ahead and do the rear, so we need to make sure there's no spring pressure on these push rods here. And to do that, what we do is we're going to jack up the back tire and then jockey the tire back and forth to get this cylinder into position where it's at top dead center on the compression stroke. And to help make it easier to move the tire, I'm going to go ahead and remove the left hand side spark plugs, so that way you're not fighting compression, and you can also sometimes look down in there and kind of see where the piston's at. Okay, so to get this in top dead center on the compression stroke, I'm going to start with the back cylinder here. You do one at a time, so I'm going to do the back. Then what you do from here is you just, the same thing as you did when you were getting into 6th gear, jockey the tire so you can start to see the push rods going up and down. And the key here is to watch the intake valve, and that's the one towards the closest to the actual cylinder there. So as I rotate this tire, you should start to see those push rods go up and go down. You can start to see there my intake push rods. It's going up right now, then it falls back down there. And then from here, what you're going to do is make sure that you can spin both push rods with your hands, with light finger pressure. That way I know all the pressure is off the lobes here. If you can't spin one of these, so right now I can't spin the intake, so I need to keep rotating to make sure I can be able to spin that, and that way I know that there's no spring pressure on there. So now I can spin both of these freely here. And that way I know I am on the compression stroke and I can go ahead and cut. So a quick check here that I'm going to do just to make sure that I am completely top dead center. Like I was saying before, part of the reason I took out those spark plugs was to fight compression, so they're just coming out. It's not pushing them against the spark plugs, but you just take a straw or something and dip it down into the spark plug, make sure you hold on to it. And then what you do is you rotate the tire. You can kind of see the straw moving up. So there, I went a little bit too far, so you saw the straw go up and go back down. Basically what you're trying to do is get this straw at the very highest point you can get before it falls back down. And if you rotate it over and it falls back down, just rotate the tire backwards so you get it to as close as you can to the top there. So now I know the piston's all the way at the top. Now I'm going to go double check my push rods again. So back here at the push rods, I can spin this front one pretty easily, and I can spin the back one pretty easily. So one quick note here on what we're doing when I say trying to find top dead center on the compression stroke before we cut the push rods out. So your tappets sit on your cam like this, and when the cam rotates, this lobe lifts up the lifter and pushes up on the push rod. So what we need to do before we cut those is find the lowest point we can on the two valves that we're working with. So on this particular cam right here, it's in this spot right here where on this part of the lobe there's no lift at all. So that's the spot we're trying to find, and when we find that, there's the least amount of spring pressure there, because if we do it right here, there's no spring pressure on this valve, but back here you can see that this valve is at full lift there, so that's why we can't do it there. If we do that there, or we'll be fighting spring pressure and something will come flying out of there. So this is why we need to get it right here. Once you get all four push rods cut out of there, you can go ahead and remove the O-rings in here. We're going to be replacing those later. Once the O-rings are out, you can go ahead and start backing out these Allens here. They are a 3/16 Allen, and they hold on the tappet cover. So we're going to go ahead and remove these tappet covers. Alright, once you get all four bolts removed out of there, go ahead and just lift this off of there. One thing you want to make sure is to get this gasket on here, make sure it doesn't get stuck to here or on here, because we're going to go ahead and replace that later. Then we're going to go ahead and remove the anti-rotation cuff here. It's a 3/8 socket here. Back this bolt out. There's the cuff. If you pull out one of these lifters here, you can kind of see what these things do. So this lifter fits in here just like that. You can see it has two flat sides here, and all this cuff does is make sure that this lifter doesn't spin around and end up riding on the lobe of the cam like that. So all it does is keep it centered there. Once you have the anti-rotation cuffs out, the next step is to go ahead and remove the bolts that hold on the cam cover. So it's a 3/16 Allen, and go ahead and start backing these out, and then we'll remove the cam cover here. You will want to have something underneath of it, a drain or a catch pan or something, because there is a little bit of oil left in here. So when you pull this off, there's going to be some oil falling out of it. Alright, so once we got the cam chest cover off, We need to do a couple more things before we get to the cam itself. So the first thing is here, we're gonna loosen or remove the cam chain tensioner here. That's a T27, we're just gonna back both those out. Then we need to remove this bottom bolt and this top bolt, and these actually spin together with this chain here. So you're gonna need some type of a little sprocket lock here to stop these from turning while you back these two out. You can buy a tool or you can make something. We're just going to use a little piece of hardened plastic that we have and we cut into shape, so we're going to put that in there to make sure this thing doesn't spin when we take it out. Once we get the two sprockets off of there, we can go ahead and start backing out the bolts that hold on the cam plate itself. Once the oil pump and cam plate are out, you just go ahead and reach in here and pull out the cam. So once you get the cam out of there, there's one more thing we had to remove before we can start installing anything. And the last piece is the cam bearing deep inside the cam chest there. So we're replacing that with the one that comes in the Zipper Performance 468 cam kit. And to remove that, you need a specialty tool. We're using the Jim's tool, and it comes with pretty easy to understand instructions. So I'm just going to follow those instructions here and pull this cam bearing out and then replace it with the new one. And here's the old bearing. And here's the one we are replacing it with. And you can see how many more rollers are in there. Alright, so the next step here is to put the new bearing in there, and you want to make sure you put it in a certain way. You can kind of see here that one side is more round than the other one. This one's kind of flat, this one's kind of round. You're going to insert the rounded edge into the bike, and then you'll have this face with numbers and letters on it facing out. So again, you're just going to use the same Jim's tool and just follow the instructions that come with the tool there. Okay, so I went ahead and removed the oil pump from the cam plate, and that just helps slide it back in. So when you're putting this back in, before you go ahead and do that, you're going to replace the O-ring here, and then there's another one in the back. And for that one, you're going to put the O-ring into position and then slide the oil pump into it. And then what you want to make sure is that your oil pump is even with these holes here in your cam chest. And when they're even, that's when you know that you are seated into that O-ring there. Next, I'm going to go ahead and start lubing up the cam here. I'm going to put a little on the bearing in there. And then just on all the surfaces of the cam here. Then you're just going to go ahead and slide your cam into position. This sprocketed side will face out, and the smooth end will go inside there. Once the cam's in there, I'm going to go ahead and lube up the journals in the cam plate here. Next, I'm going to go ahead and get all oil pump bolts and cam plate bolts started, but I'm not going to tighten anything down yet, and we'll talk about the torque sequence here in a little bit. Okay, once you have everything snugged down to where it's holding everything on there, but nothing's tight yet, the first thing you're going to do is tighten down 2 of the oil pump bolts. And it's numbers 1 and 2, and they're numbered here where the oil pump bolts go into. Tighten those down to 60 inch-pounds, numbers 1 and 2. Once those are torqued down, you're going to rotate the engine over just to make sure that oil pump, all those gears in there, all those cogs are lined up and in place 2 times here. So there's 1, there's 2. Next you're going to do bolts 3 through 8, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So we're going to torque those down to 120 inch-pounds. Next you're going to go back and do number 1 and 2, so here and here. And you're also going to do numbers 9 and 10. So you're going to go 1, 2, 9 is here, and then 10 is here. And you're going to do those to 120 inch-pounds. Once you're sure everything's torqued to spec, go ahead and turn the engine over. Make sure nothing is binding up. Or after you've made sure nothing is binding, you want to stop this shaft here so this flat spot is facing up. Next we're going to make sure that our sprockets are still lined up and make sure everything's even. So what we're going to do is install the sprockets again without the chain, just to make sure our depth didn't change anywhere. So all we're going to do is make sure your spacer's still on there. Put the sprockets back on. Also, when you're putting the sprockets on, you'll notice that they have little alignment marks there, so it only goes on one way. There's a flat spot right there, and that will go on the flat spot on the cam. Next we'll install our 2 bolts here. This bigger one goes up on top. Start threading that one in, and then on this bottom one here, to do this check, we're going to use a different washer. So the original washer is this big thick one right here, and we're going to use a smaller one to do this check. So install these, put your sprocket locker in there, and go ahead and tighten these both down to 15 foot-pounds. Once those are tightened to 15 foot-pounds, we're going to go ahead and check the alignment of the 2 sprockets. And what you're going to do is you're going to take some type of straight edge here and lay it across the teeth and make sure it's on the flat spot on both of them. And then what you're going to do is take a feeler gauge and make sure it's within spec. And the spec is it can be no bigger than 9 thousandths of an inch difference there. Once you verify that it's within spec, you can go ahead and use your sprocket lock tool again to back these things out, and then we'll go ahead and install it for final assembly. And we're going to go ahead and install our sprockets, and when you put these on here, you need to make sure that your timing marks are lined up. So you have that mark there on the bottom sprocket, that one there on the top sprocket, and again you want to have your motor positioned so this flat spot is facing up and this bigger tooth on your cam is facing up, and then that should just slide right on there. Next, to get an accurate torque reading, what we're going to do is we're going to torque these down to 15 foot-pounds using our sprocket lock tool again, and then we're going to back it off. We're going to loosen them one full turn and then retighten them back down to the factory torque specs of 34 foot-pounds, or 35 foot-pounds and 24 here on the bottom. Since we're only backing these out one turn, once we get them in there on the 15 foot-pounds, we're going to go ahead and put red Loctite on there. And then you want to make sure to reinstall that thicker washer on that bottom bolt. Once the sprocket bolts are in place and torqued to spec, and you have double and triple checked that the timing marks are still lined up, you can go ahead and install your chain tensioner. And again, those are T27 Torx bits, and those get torqued to 120 inch-pounds. Once that's all torqued up, I'm going to go ahead and apply some assembly lube to the chain here. Next, we can go ahead and put the cover on and make sure you include that gasket that comes with the kit. I'm going to go ahead and get all these snugged up with Loctite, and then there is a torque sequence here. So once you get all these in here loose, then you're going to go ahead and tighten them down to 120 inch-pounds, and then I'll show you the torque sequence here when I got all these buttoned up. Alright, once you got them all in there, nice and, not tight, but nice and snug, you can go ahead and begin the torque sequence. And what it is this is going to be number 1, this is number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that's it. Next, we're going to take our lifters, and I have had mine all soaked up and they're filled with oil so I can get an accurate reading when we do the push rods there. So I'm going to go ahead and drop those in place. Next, we're going to take our anti-rotation cuff here and make sure you have the right one. They're labeled R for rear, F for front, so get the right ones on there. Put some Loctite on the bolts, and we're going to tighten these down to 100 inch-pounds. While we do that, next I'm going to rotate the tire again to make sure I'm not binding on anything there, watching to make sure my lifters aren't rubbing against that anti-rotation cuff. Next, you're going to clean up your surface here. Make sure all the oil's off of it. And you're going to set on your new gaskets here and go ahead and apply or reapply the lifter covers there. Getting Loctite on these, and then 100 inch-pounds. Once we have the tappet covers on, we can go ahead and start installing the push rods. One thing you want to be sure of is to get the O-rings left over from the stock push rods out of the way, because we're going to be replacing those. Again, we're using the S&S quickie style push rods, so that way we don't have to go up into the heads and drop the push rods in from the top. We can just collapse these all the way down, install them right here through the tappet holes. We want to make sure the engine is on top dead center on the compression stroke of whatever cylinder you're working with. So I'm going to start with the rear, so I'm going to go ahead and make sure this is in top dead center. And before we watch the push rods go up and down, so now you're going to have to watch the tappet go up and down. And then again, you can use that the straw trick on the other side to make sure your piston's all the way at the top on that side over there. Alright, so our next step here is to go ahead and install our push rods, and the kit comes with the S&S quickie push rods. And what's really nice about these is you can thread them into where they collapse in like that, so that gives us enough room to just slip them into position without having to take off the tappet covers or the heads there. So what you're going to do is you'll take the cover, slide it into the cover like that, and just put it into position there. And then what you do is you just thread this piece down onto the lifter until you're at what's called zero lash, and that's just where there's no up and down movement in between the lifter and the tappet. So once you get that to zero lash, then what you're going to do is set the preload. And basically what that is, in the lifter there's a little plunger in there that has 2/1000 of an inch of travel, and what we want to do is set this push rod right in the middle of that travel at a 1/1000th. So what you're going to do is you're going to set this to zero lash, then hold the skinny part here with a 1/4 inch wrench, and then thread this up 4 full turns. And that's why I have that mark there to help me know how many turns I've done. So you're going to turn this one 4 full rotations, and that'll put us 1/1000th of an inch down into that lifter. And then once you do the one cylinder, you're going to have to wait about 20 minutes for the lifters to bleed down, because what actually happens is it doesn't push down into the lifters right away. Your lifters have to release some of that oil. So what happens is it actually pushes up on your rocker arms, which opens up the valves. So we need time for the lifters to bleed down. And once the lifters have bled down, then you can roll the motor over to top dead center on compression on the other cylinder, and then do the same thing with those push rods. Now we're going to go ahead and install our new rubber O-rings. Once we get that into position, we're going to need something to keep this out of the way while we're tightening it down. So you can kind of do whatever you want here. You may just wrap a rubber band around here to stop it from falling. I've seen people use some type of hook, like a paper clip with a rubber band up here. So the zombie breath intake has this velocity stack in here, and that just mounts right in there, and then it also has a spacer there on the back. You just want to line up the bolt holes, insert your 3 5/32 Allens in there, and then go ahead and bolt it up to the throttle body. Once you get those 3 bolts installed, you can go ahead and install the face plate there. And make sure the plexiglass plate is lined up like that, flat side down into the face. Alright, once that is on, we can go ahead and put our new header on there. So the new header it's the exact same fitment as the stock header. It will come with new gaskets here, and we have a video on how to take those out, so go ahead and watch that video. So this is the Tap Performance head pipe, and the new head pipe is going to come with both the stock O2 sensor bungs and wideband O2 sensor bungs, and depending on what your setup is, whichever one you're not using, you're going to go ahead and plug. So it comes with a couple different plugs. It comes with the plugs for the narrow band and the wideband, so whichever ones you're not using, go ahead and plug those up. Next, you're going to take the new header, put the flange on first, then reinstall the C-clip. Next, we're going to go ahead and get it into position here. Line it up there, line it up there, slide your flanges up onto the studs. That'll help hold it in place while you bolt it on there. I like to get these started just loosely. Alright, I like to keep it a little loose just so I can have some free play here, because it makes reinstalling the O2 sensors a lot easier because there's not a whole lot of room to play with. So here I'm just going to counter twist this the opposite way that it needs to be twisted in. Now that those are on there, you go ahead and start snugging things down. So before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and install this bracket down here. Goes on a certain way, just like that. That one started. Then I'm going to go ahead and start tightening down the actual bolts that bolt the head pipe up into the heads here. I'm just going to kind of go back and forth to make sure everything's even. I don't want to tighten down one bolt as tight as I can because it may get lopsided in there. So just go back and forth on each stud there, and then also on each cylinder. So next up here, we're going to go ahead and reinstall the stock cross-under piece. Make sure you have that clamp on there before you do it. And what I like to do is I like to feed it through from the opposite side so I can just get a little bit more leverage on it. Just make sure that's on there, and then if it's struggling to go on there, a little bit of WD-40 goes a long way there. That should help slip it right on. Next, while we're down there on the cross under piece, we're going to go ahead and reinstall the bracket here, and that's with this 1/4 inch Allen. Once you got the cross under piece, we can go ahead and install the heat shields. I like to leave them on there a little bit loose to start off with, so that way I can get everything into place and I know it's right before I tighten everything up. For this rear heat shield, there's 2 little standoffs here on this back hose clamp. So just when you put this on, you want to make sure that this hose clamp is going to be resting on these 2 standoffs. Once the heat shields are on, we can go ahead and put on the floorboard. Alright, now we'll go ahead and move to the mufflers. We'll start with the right side, and again the right side is a 15mm, left hand side is a 9/16 on those. We like to just utilize the same stock placement of the exhaust clamp. So when you put it on there, you want this thing down and out. Otherwise, if you have it facing in, it's hard to get to with the ratchet there, so just make sure it's down and out. And again, it may help to spray some WD-40 on there just to help it slip on, but it should just slide right on there for you. And you want to be careful not to overdo it here, because if you're pushing really hard, it may slip, and then you may bump your muffler into the heat shield here, and you'll have a big scratch right here. So just something to be aware of there. Alright, before we tighten that down, we're going to go ahead and reinstall the bag brackets there. Now I'm going to go ahead and move to the left side here. So I like to leave these clamps loose until after I get the bags on. So once I have the bags on, then I can kind of adjust the mufflers where I want them to be, so that they, so the slash cuts line up with the bags, and to make sure they're not sideways inside those bag cutouts there. So now I'm going to go ahead and put the bags on, and again you just set it on here, line up the bolts here, screw them in evenly. And again, just like we did when we took them off, if you have any wires plugged in here, make sure they're plugged back in. Get these tightened up. Now that the bags are on here, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the mufflers to where I like where they're sitting in here. You don't have to do it this way. This is just something we like to do to make sure everything's even. You can go ahead and tighten them down before you put the bags on. The only thing you want to make sure you do, if you're doing it my way, you don't want to pull it too far out, the muffler, because you want to make sure this exhaust clamp is fully on there with the full width of the clamp. And if you do that, then you should be good to go. Okay, so now that I have the mufflers lined up where I think they look good, they're in line with the bags, they have an equal gap between the muffler and the bag here and on the other side. I'm going to go ahead and tighten them down. Another thing too, you want to remember that cross under clamp needs to be tightened down as well. But Other than that, that is the end of the install there, so that's all there is to it.